Hello, everybody. Welcome tonight to our story sharing session. We have a very exciting guest. Hey, Emma.
Hey,
Where are you joining us from, Emma?
from St. Augustine, Florida.
Where is that in Florida?
It is northeast Florida,
Northeast
near
Florida.
to Jacksonville.
All right,
It's
cool.
in the presentation, so you'll.
Oh, goodness, I'm getting ahead. I'm getting ahead of us. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. As you find us tonight, please share where you are tuning in from. It's super fun to see all the different places that this community is. And it's fun for Emma to look back afterwards and see all the people that were tuned in and where they were watching from. So please go ahead and also, if you can, share this video to your profile, give us lots of hearts, give us the thumbs up. All that engagement really helps Facebook know that this is engaging content and it should be shared. So that way we can reach more people with more awareness. Also, please remember that this is for education and awareness purposes. So if anything about Emma's story makes you question anything about your own medical experience, please remember to bring those questions to a medical professional. We aren't medical professionals, so should never be thought of as medical advice. But also remember that the comments with the video are so great. We love when people commenting about what's resonating with you, asking questions for Emma to answer after her presentation. But just please remember that those comments stay with the video, so you wouldn't want to share anything there that you don't want to share publicly. So just that last reminder. And trying to think, as far as updates from Project Sleep, I just want to thank everybody for such an incredible World Narcolepsy Day. It was our third year, and super, super exciting to see all the engagement around the world. And so many of you guys made that day, so special. So we will have an official recap, a post of all the good things that were happening later this month. I believe we'll put that on October 22nd, so 1 month after World Narcolepsy Day. And so just thank you again for everybody for participating in that day, making it so special. We have, I'm trying to think. We finished our Rising Voices training for this past summer, which Emma was a part of. She is a new trained speaker graduate. And so if you enjoy watching this and think that you'd like to share your story the way that Emma is, we love having different stories. Different stories are so important. So our next training session will be next summer, and the application for the program will open in February of next year. So just make sure you're on our e-list so that you're getting updates. And I'm trying to think, we have a sleep advocacy forum coming up in a few weeks. It is a leadership meeting where we talk with members of Congress. We talk with leaders of professional societies, patient organizations, different research institutes, NIH, NINDS, CDC. So we talk about sleep and policy. It's really dorky, really nerdy, and really amazing if you're into sleep and policy. So we'll be having that event, and we'll share lots of videos afterwards, some of the content from that as well. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm probably missing something else, but that's what I can think of for right now. So without further ado, we are so excited to have Emma share her presentation. Emma is a trailblazer, guys, probably in many ways, but in the one way that comes to mind right now is that Emma is the first person with sleep apnea diagnosis to complete this program, which is called Rising Voices of Narcolepsy. But we have been piloting it in different conditions, including idiopathic hypersomnia. We have a few graduates, and now sleep apnea. So we are looking to expand the program to build a coalition of people with different sleep disorders who are out there sharing their story, raising awareness about sleep and sleep disorders. So Emma is a trailblazer who has helped us to adapt the program for sleep apnea. So we're really, really grateful for that. So Emma, do you want to go ahead and pull up your slides and I'll read your bio?
Sure thing.
Okay. Emma Cooksey grew up in Scotland and now lives in Florida with her husband and 2 daughters. She was diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea at the age of 30 and is the creator and host of Sleep Apnea Stories podcast. As a speaker with Project Sleep's Rising Voices of Narcolepsy program, Emma feels proud to shatter sleep apnea stereotypes, which delay diagnosis and treatment for many. So we did put a link to Emma's podcast, which you guys should definitely check out, Sleep Apnea Stories. It's in the description of this video. And without further ado, it is my big honor to introduce you guys to Emma.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. That was a really nice intro. So I'm really glad that Julie started by saying that I'm originally from Scotland, because I know sometimes if we don't address that, people spend the whole time of me talking saying, is she from Canada? Like, where's her accent from? So I grew up in Scotland. And the main thing about growing up there is, of course, you're right there in Europe. So every summer, my family would take trips all around to different countries. So we would go to France, Spain, Italy, and I just love seeing new cultures and exploring new places. So when I started university, I was in Scotland at Aberdeen University, and I used to just spend all my time looking for opportunities to work abroad during my summers off in between terms at university. So one summer I worked in Vancouver in Canada. Another summer I was a camp counselor. I worked at a summer camp in New Jersey. And here is a picture right here of me at Niagara Falls. So that was after my New Jersey summer. We took a road trip up to Niagara Falls. And I just love seeing, new places and exploring all that with new people. And then when I got done with my 4 years at university, I decided to go backpacking for a year. So I took a trip backpacking around the world. I started in Southeast Asia. So me and my friend Julie we were in Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, and then we flew to Sydney in Australia. So this is the typical picture of a tourist in Australia with a koala bear. So when I arrived in Sydney, I was 22 years old, and I was living in a house full of other backpackers. So we had, like mattresses all over the floors, and there were a lot of us staying in this small house. This is a picture. I have a terrible haircut in this picture, but here I am, bottom left-hand corner. And this was actually Christmas with a whole bunch of backpackers from all over the place. And so it was obviously really fun. But during this time, I had a job working for a huge law firm in their corporate litigation department. So this is a picture of me with my colleague surrounded by boxes of legal documents. I had no windows. And this is really when I started realizing just how tired I was all the time. So it was while I was in Sydney living in that house with all the backpackers that I would have to wake up very early, like 6:30 in the morning, to be able to catch a bus to downtown Sydney for that job. And so one morning particularly sticks out in my mind. I was in the shower and I was just crying, just sobbing with huge rolly tears coming down my cheek and joining at my chin and dropping off. And I remember kind of my roommate Marie came into the bathroom and she heard me crying. And I won't try and do a Sheffield accent because Marie's from Sheffield, which is a very specific accent. But she said, "Are you all right, Nate?" And I said, "Well, I've just been crying in the shower for every morning for weeks now." And she was like, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" And I said, "Because I'm so exhausted." And I told her, even when I sleep 8 hours at night, I wake up anxious with a pounding chest, and I feel just as tired as when I went to sleep. And so she kind of said to me, maybe you should go and see a doctor because that doesn't seem normal, right? And I think that's the first time that I kind of stopped and thought, yeah, that's probably not normal. I should probably go and see a doctor. But right then, being a backpacker, I didn't have, like I wasn't set up with a doctor there in Australia. But I thought to myself, when I get back to Scotland, I'm going to go and make an appointment and see a doctor about this. So I finished my traveling. I finished up that job. I did a little bit more traveling in Tasmania and New Zealand. And then I flew back to Scotland. And I moved in with some friends in Glasgow and started a job there. So I was fairly settled. So I thought, this is the time that I should go and see a doctor about how I've been feeling, because I was still really tired and I still felt anxious and exhausted all the time. So I found a GP, and he was lovely. He was really young and really kind. And I told him exactly how I'd been feeling. I said, I've been sleeping all night, but every day I'm exhausted and sleepy and tired all the time, and really anxious. And I think I also cried at him. And he was really, really kind about that. And he just said, look, we're going to do every blood test. So we'll test everything. And if there's anything wrong, we're going to find it. And I went home just really for the first time thinking, wow, somebody's really on my side with this. I'm so excited to find out, what in the world is going on. So about a week later, I went back for those blood test results. And again, he was really kind, the GP, and he said, really great news. We got all of those blood test results, and there's absolutely nothing wrong. You're not anemic. There's no problems with any of your levels. So that's great. And I was kind of like, yeah, but I'm thinking, well, why am I so tired? And he said to me, people in their early 20s often, it's a really anxious, tiring time, right? Like he said, you're starting a new job and you're away from your family. And, it's not unusual for people in that situation to feel anxious and overwhelmed. So I went home and I was pretty bummed out about it, just because I felt like, although he listened really well to me, I felt like we didn't really get an answer as to why I was so tired. And so I just kind of went home and got on with my life as best I could, but I still was dealing with being very tired all the time. So this time in my life wasn't all completely gloomy. Some really great things happened. I met my wonderful husband, Jason, who you can see right here wearing a kilt for our wedding. And so Jason is originally from Florida in the United States, but he'd been working for an American company in Scotland for a number of years. So we met and got married in Scotland, and I was 29 at that point. And soon after that, Jason started talking about some work opportunities that he was interested in back in Florida. And so when I was 29, we moved to Florida. So really soon after we got to Florida, 3 weeks after we got here, I got pregnant with my first daughter. And I was not one of those glowy pregnant people who just feel great the whole time and I was really delighted, but I also was very pukey and still exhausted and tired all the time and just didn't feel great. So I got to about 6 months pregnant, and I decided, of course, I was going to see an OBGYN a lot of the time to check on the pregnancy and the baby. But I decided to go and talk to a GP, or what they were calling a PCP here, primary care physician. So I found one close to my home, and I went and met with her. And again, she was really kind. And we talked all about how I'd been feeling. And I was sure to tell her that I had been feeling very tired, sleepy, and exhausted and overwhelmed well before I moved countries or got pregnant. But she just said, well, you're pregnant, it's normal to feel really tired. So I went home and I was like, kind of like felt like that wasn't quite right. But I was like, well, I've never been pregnant before, right? So I thought, maybe this will get better after I'm not pregnant. So I went on and had my baby. So this is, if you look at the other picture, this is Katie, pretty newborn there in a little baby carrier. And so for anyone who's had a baby, it's a really joyful time. And I definitely was homesick, and I missed my family and friends. And I didn't really have that many friends yet here in Florida. But I think there's something about having a newborn baby with you where people in grocery stores or pumping gas or wherever you are, people smile and ask you about the baby. And that really just helped me to feel, more surrounded by community, I think. So Katie was really, in retrospect, a very easy baby. She slept really well pretty early. So by about 5 or 6 months, she was sleeping long stretches at night, and I wasn't having to get up and feed her. So at that point, when I started getting, of course, I was very exhausted while she was a baby, like so many people that have babies. But when she started sleeping through the night about 6 months, I noticed that even when I got those longer stretches of sleep, I still was tired and sleepy during the day and exhausted and just felt anxious and overwhelmed and terrible, essentially. So when she got to 6 months old, I went back to see the same doctor that I'd seen while I was pregnant. And I said, I've had the baby now, she's sleeping all night. I'm still waking up with a pounding chest, anxious, like I'm being chased by a bear. Even if I have 8 hours sleep, I'm exhausted and so tired all day. And she said, you're a new mom, this is normal. And I kind of like pushed back a little bit, and I said, well, people have been saying, like you said that when I was pregnant, and even when I'm sleeping all night, I still feel very tired. And she said, yeah, but looking after a baby is physically quite demanding, and you probably don't realize how much that's impacting how you feel. So I went home, but I think at that point I was starting to think, like, we need to look into this more, and people are not listening to me, which is not a great feeling, So, oh, excuse me. A few weeks after that doctor's appointment, I took Katie, and so again, she's like maybe 7 months old at this point. I took Katie to see my mother-in-law, who lives about 25 minutes from where we live. And I was coming back from that trip after lunch, and I got onto the Buckman Bridge, which is this huge bridge in Jacksonville with maybe like 5 lanes of traffic each side. And it was filled with traffic. And as soon as I got onto the bridge, I started feeling really, really tired. So I know most of you probably have felt that feeling before, where you're blowing air in your face and you're kind of tapping your face to try and stay awake. And the other thing I was trying to do was read the letters on the number plate of a big truck that was quite far ahead of me. And so I just remembered there was an L and a Z, and I just thought to myself, if I can just hold on to looking at all the letters on the number plate, I'm going to be okay. Well, the next thing I knew, the number plate letters were coming towards me almost in slow motion. And I slammed on my brakes and there was a terrible screech. And somehow, by a miracle, I didn't hit the truck, but it was so close. And it gave me a huge fright. So I think that that was the first time that I had my baby in the car with me and something like that had happened. So I was thinking, well, not only did I just put myself and all these people around me on the bridge in danger, I also just endangered my baby daughter sleeping in the back seat. And so for me, somehow that was a turning point. And I got home that day safely. And I gave Katie to my husband, Jason, and I said, I have to figure out this sleep thing because I just almost crashed and it's really serious. And, you know, there's got to be something wrong, right? Like it's not normal to feel this tired. So I called the same doctor's office. Oopsie. I called the same doctor's office, and here in the United States, there's a little bit of back and forth between your doctor referring you for a sleep study. So my doctor referred me to a sleep specialist who said that they wanted to get a sleep study. And then my healthcare or my health insurance people came back and said they would pay for this type of sleep study. So it's a whole thing. Anyway, they told me that I could have a sleep study in my own home. And they sent a sleep tech to the house to wire me up with all these electrodes. And the main thing, this is a picture of me with all the electrodes on my head about to go and have a great night's sleep. It's not very comfortable, but so the main thing I remember about the sleep study was I was still breastfeeding my daughter at that point. So it has lots of wires from your head that all plug into a little kind of box on the front of you. And so in order to breastfeed my daughter, my husband had to kind of stand with all of the wires over his arm so that I could like have an angle to be able to feed my daughter, which was crazy. So we made it through the sleep study, and shortly after that, I went up to Jacksonville to meet with a sleep specialist for the first time. And so I really didn't know anything about sleep medicine at all. So the doctor told me, we did the test and you have moderate obstructive sleep apnea, which I had never heard of. And then he said, but don't worry, you'll be feeling better in no time because we have a machine called a CPAP where you wear a mask over your face and it blows air into your airway and keeps your airway open at night. And so I have to say I had really mixed feelings about, you know, this idea of potentially having to, you know, use this mask at night to sleep potentially forever. But also there was definite relief that I had a diagnosis for why I'd been feeling so bad. So I also clung to this idea, like he kept saying, you're going to be feeling better in no time once you start therapy. So I was like, okay, you know, and I was so tired at that point that I was like, anything that would make me feel better would be great. So I had never heard of sleep apnea at all. I was like, oh, what's that? So let's dig into what sleep apnea is. So sleep apnea is a serious sleep disorder that occurs when a person's breathing is interrupted during sleep. People with untreated sleep apnea stop breathing repeatedly during their sleep, sometimes hundreds of times. This means the brain and the body might not get enough oxygen. So due to the lack of oxygen, sleep apnea increases the risk of serious and even life-threatening health complications, such as stroke, heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and depression. So I was really surprised to find out how serious a condition this was, and that it had so many consequences, right? So sleep apnea affects people to varying degrees. So that's really important. So symptoms and risk to health can be mild, moderate, or severe. And altogether, it's estimated that sleep apnea affects 1 in 4 people to some degree. So there is a really, really wide range. Some people could have very mild sleep apnea and not really be that affected by it in their life. And for other people, it's really severe and serious. So the symptoms really vary a lot between people as well. This is what makes it so difficult to diagnose, right? Sleepiness or lack of energy during the day, and especially like while driving, like you remember I fell asleep at the wheel, so that's a really good indicator. So the most important thing is even after a full night's sleep, right? So it's really a red flag if somebody is sleeping all night and then they're still sleepy and they have lack of energy during the day. Loud snoring can be a symptom. It might come and go through the night and be loud enough to wake others near you. You may also occasionally wake up suddenly with a choking or gasping sensation. So for anybody sleeping beside someone, it looks kind of like that. So disrupted nighttime sleep, including restless sleep, repeated awakenings, or insomnia, can indicate sleep apnea. Morning headaches and dizziness. Scientists aren't really sure why people with sleep apnea get these. It might be because the poor sleep or lack of oxygen is caused by the breathing problems. And that causes it. Waking up with a very sore or dry throat or dry mouth. This happens because oftentimes people with sleep apnea are breathing through their mouths, so that can be an indicator. Nightmares. Some research has found a link between apnea and bad dreams, but more research is needed in that area. There's really more research needed in all of these areas. Cognitive and mental health impacts. Anxiety and depression are very common with people with sleep apnea. So that's certainly, I'd mentioned that I felt anxious all the time, and I've certainly struggled with depression as well. So that for me has definitely been one of the symptoms. Lack of sleep can lead to forgetfulness, brain fog, mood swings, and lack of interest in sex. So there are 2 different types of sleep apnea. There's obstructive sleep apnea, and that's what I have. So that's way more common than the other type that we're going to get to. So it's caused by a blockage of the airway, usually when the soft tissue in the back of the throat collapses during sleep. And then another type of sleep apnea is central sleep apnea. So unlike obstructive sleep apnea, the airway is not blocked, but the brain fails to signal the muscles to breathe due to instability in the respiratory control center in your brain. So on to diagnosis. Medical providers can diagnose sleep apnea using either an in-lab study, which typically includes measuring your brain waves, heart rate, breathing, and movement to determine a diagnosis. But there's also the home sleep study that I was talking about, like that I had mine done at home. So that allows you to sleep at home while a small monitor collects data. So at the end of either test, a sleep technician is going to interpret the data and come up with an AHI number. So AHI stands for Apnea Hypopnea Index. So an apnea is the number of times per hour someone stops breathing for 10 seconds or more. And a hypopnea is a reduction in the airflow that results in a drop of oxygen levels by 3% or more. So roughly speaking, a person with an AHI of 25 is stopping breathing 25 times an hour. So it's really tough to get a good night's sleep if you're constantly stopping breathing, right? So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that sleep apnea is treated. So it can't be emphasized enough that sleep apnea varies so much between different people, right? There's no one size fits all treatment because it's such a complicated condition. So symptom management really varies, but it might include positive airway pressure or PAP devices, such as CPAP, AutoPAP, or BiPAP. And those are prescribed by a sleep specialist to push air into your airway to keep it open at night. Oral appliances are made by specialist dentists who they make a little device which prevents your airway from collapsing by moving your jaw forward, your mandible forward. And they're a good alternative for people with mild or moderate sleep apnea, but they're generally not recommended for severe cases. And again, it just all depends on the case. For some people, the anatomical structure of their airway is a factor in sleep apnea. So surgery either to move the jaws forward to increase the width of the airway, or maybe removing tonsils and adenoids to make more room, or even the soft tissue at the back of the throat. So those are all options for some people. Wakefulness medications are sometimes prescribed for people with excessive daytime sleepiness, usually after they're already using PAP therapy. So if they're using a CPAP every night as recommended and they still are struggling with daytime sleepiness, sometimes sleep specialists will prescribe wakefulness medication. For some people where large weight gain has been a cause of their sleep apnea, sometimes weight loss can improve or eradicate their symptoms. More research is needed on all sorts of other therapies. So things like positional therapy, where usually when people are lying flat on their back, they have more apneas than when they're elevated and sleeping on their side. But again, we just need more research in all these different areas. So for coping strategies, that also really depends on the person. But social support like meetup groups or social media can be helpful. I know that I have really enjoyed meeting a lot of different people with sleep apnea on Instagram, and it's really helped me feel less alone. And it can't be overemphasized that improvements in general health through sleep hygiene, diet, and fitness can really help improve your quality of life day to day. So I've now been using a CPAP for 13 years, and it's definitely helped me to improve the quality of my life. So I think I just kind of put a bunch of different photos here. So I'll just kind of tell you a little bit about them. The top left-hand photo is me doing yoga on a stand-up paddle board. But I actually spent most of that day in the water, but I just think it's kind of a fancy photo. And then in the middle, I've been able to take lots of trips to see family and friends in Scotland. So I'm right here in the stripy top, and this is my daughter. And these are all my friends from high school and all of their kids. So there's a lot of us now. So, and of course, when I take trips, I take my CPAP with me, and it's a whole nother layer of getting used to the new place and everything. So this is me trying to blend in Florida in the top right. So that's me there with the sunglasses and my husband's camouflage hat thing. I'm trying to blend in because we're at the Daytona 500, which is not really my normal habitat. So we had a really good day though. And then I guess this is an example, the bottom right-hand corner. This is me right here with the knees poking out. And this is kind of an example of something that I would not have been able to do before my treatment with CPAP therapy, because I just would have been too exhausted. But I spent about a year doing some improv training and performing with an improv troupe. So that's me and my gang on the stage doing one of our performances. And then this is me and my husband, Jason, on a well-deserved trip for the weekend. And then this is my family. So Since my diagnosis at age 30, I went on to have another daughter who's there in the green t-shirt, called Rosie. So I was 35 when I had her, so my kids were 5 years apart. So although I wasn't falling asleep at the wheel anymore, I definitely found it a lot to juggle a newborn baby, a 5-year-old, and then also CPAP therapy at the same time. It was a lot. I'm now 44 and the girls are 13 and 9. And I would say what I'm learning, the longer, it goes since my diagnosis of sleep apnea, is I'm learning just to accept that I have a chronic health condition, right? So I think to begin with, I tried to do all the things because I didn't want to miss out on things. But now I'm much more likely to say no to things that are going to be overwhelming or overly demanding or just are going to mess up my sleep too much. So recently I was invited to a wedding in Scotland this month, and I did want to go, but I decided not to because I just felt like it was more self-honoring to just stay here. And so I just told them I just can't do it. Because sleep apnea, even when you're treating it with a CPAP, like I think jet lag is a lot for me. So I just decided not to go, which I think is a really great decision. So this is a picture of my family again. So my eldest daughter, Katie, is now almost 14. So it's difficult to imagine that is the same child that was the little baby in my front carrier earlier on in my presentation. So she's the one that was in the back seat when I fell asleep at the wheel. And so now she's taller than me, which is crazy. And she plays volleyball all the time. So I spend a lot of time watching her at volleyball tournaments, and it's really fun. So then Rosie is 9. She's right here. And she loves to skateboard and to catch lizards and to play Minecraft. And she also loves hanging out with our dog Bear. So this is Bear. So anyway, yeah, he's a lot to deal with. He's still a puppy, so he's crazy. And this right here is a picture of my podcast. So I have a podcast Julie mentioned at the start called Sleep Apnea Stories. And I first started the podcast in 2020. And I think a lot of the things that motivated me to start the podcast were the feeling of it being strange that I had never really come across anyone in my life with sleep apnea who looked like me, or I think a lot of the stereotype is that older overweight men have sleep apnea, and I never saw anybody like me in the media or out and about. I never met anybody. So I thought if I started a podcast and I could provide a platform for other people to tell their stories, then I would feel less alone, but also it would build a community of people all working to change some of the stereotypes of sleep apnea and generally to raise awareness so people wouldn't go for 10 years without a diagnosis like I had. So I think when I first started my podcast in my closet, my family thought it was kind of an eccentric hobby. And I think they also thought it was kind of a phase and I would, quickly get tired of it. One of the funniest things about the podcast was that my kids, because they're almost 14 and 9, we spend a lot of time talking about how to be safe online and how not to talk to strangers that we've just met on the internet. And so when I first started interviewing people, I did a lot of my research online and did meet people on the internet. And my children were like, "Mom, that's not safe. You can't do that." And I was just like, well, I'm an adult, so it's different. So I have to say, when I first put the first episode of my podcast out there into the world, it was my own story. And I felt some trepidation, and I had a kind of mixture of, oh no, what if lots of people listen and they don't like it? And then I also had another feeling of, oh no, what if a lot of people listen? Like, I don't know if I'm ready for that either. So that first week, I got an email which really just made the whole thing worthwhile. It was from a woman who simply said, "Your story is my story. Thank you so much for sharing it. I feel less alone." And that email just made all the effort I put into this project just worthwhile, because I thought, if one person feels less alone who is struggling with sleep apnea, then I've kind of achieved what I set out to achieve. So with the podcast now, I've now done 40 interviews, and I feel like the more it grows and builds, the more we can spread awareness, and the more quickly people can get to diagnosis and treatment. So I've talked a little bit about raising awareness with the podcast. So because of myths and misperceptions surrounding sleep apnea, namely that it's a condition that only affects older, overweight men, many people with a serious sleep disorder have not been diagnosed or received treatment. One study showed an average of 7 years of a delay between the time a person first has sleep apnea symptoms and when they receive a referral to a sleep specialist for a sleep study. So you definitely don't have to be an older, overweight man to have sleep apnea. Of course, those people fitting that description have sleep apnea. We really want them to get, treatment and as well, but we just want to make sure that we're including, people of all sizes, women, children, just all the people that can be affected. So I hope that by sharing my story, healthcare professionals screening for sleep apnea will ask more questions and refer more people to sleep specialists for diagnosis and treatment. I also hope that I've inspired other people with sleep apnea to share their own story. I'm sharing my story today as part of the Rising Voices of Narcolepsy, a program with the nonprofit organization Project Sleep, which empowers patient advocates to share their stories and improve public understanding of narcolepsy and other sleep disorders like sleep apnea. Thank you so much for listening.
Yay! Great job, Emma. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm clapping on behalf of other people watching on Facebook. So thank you so much for tuning in, folks. Just wanted to note we had people in Virginia, the UK, Costa Rica. Those were some of the places where people mentioned where they were located. Cool. So thank you guys.
People in the UK are up late.
Yeah. Or yeah, that's right. You're staying up late. So
please, there's a recording.
Please send in any questions for Emma, and I will ask you for a few questions first. So I guess when talking about being a parent and like that your second daughter was born after you were diagnosed, how has conversations gone? I mean, obviously your kids probably see the CPAP machine in your bedroom. So what did those conversations go like in explaining what that was?
So, well, now they're just like, is it more sleep apnea stuff? Just the more advocacy I do, the more they're just like, ugh. But I have to say, early on, kids are pretty self-centered. So I think that early on, Katie maybe just kind of asked me about it, and I was like, it blows air. I kind of explained what sleep apnea was, and I kind of said it blows air to keep my airway open at night, which is great. That means I get enough oxygen to my brain and all of that. And they just kind of were like, huh, okay. Rosie, I have to say, I think Rosie heard me talking with somebody about how serious some of the like side effects can be of untreated sleep apnea. So I was talking about, increased risk of stroke and heart attack and that kind of thing. And I remember her asking me, like, are you going to have like one of those? That sounds really serious. Are you going to have any of those things? And I had to explain to her like the difference between treated sleep apnea, where you're keeping your AHI either by any of the different management tools we talked about. So you're keeping your AHI under 5, and they generally think that counts as treated sleep apnea, where you're not at higher risk for those other health complications. So I kind of explained that to her, and then I never go to sleep without my CPAP. I use it for my naps or anything like that. But if I'm ever on the sofa watching TV or something, and I just like close my eyes, Rosie will be like, like, you need to put your CPAP on. So I'm like, I'm not actually going to sleep. But yeah, so she's kind of like the CPAP police, because she knows how important it is to have it be treated.
That is really interesting. And so does the CPAP police bring the CPAP out to the couch, or do you not usually
Oh no,
bring it out?
and also I don't really, well, when I first met my husband, one of the first things he had to do was teach me how to relax. Because I'm not really a sitter on the sofa kind of a person. I'm more like a maybe watch something whilst folding laundry and doing dishes and all the stuff. So it was actually quite unusual for me to, but yeah, I wouldn't bring it out there. I would just kind of, go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's
Yeah,
quite
I wonder if that keeping busy is partly to keep yourself awake, or if it's just your human nature to not like sit down and relax.
I think it's my upbringing mainly. Like we're quite into, I mean, like my parents would watch TV, but they tended to kind of watch TV for a really specific program and then go off and achieve more things, right? So I think that I just never had really been around anybody until I met my husband who could lounge and relax so well. So I tried to take, like, I don't know, it's just not really in my nature, I think, but I'm doing better, at sitting still and just chilling out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's one of the great lessons from sleep apnea, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like rest is not laziness and all of that. And you have helped me with that, Julie.
Well, I feel like you talk about prioritizing your time in your presentation, and it's just such an important point. And I was, I think wondering with, things starting to happen again. You just went to an amazing conference that I was hoping you could share a little bit about, and meeting some people in person, and but also that takes a lot of energy, and how you're finding post-COVID readjustment.
Yeah. Okay, well, the post-COVID thing's kind of crazy because you are so used to, I mean, being around that many people just kind of makes you feel a bit like, oh, this is a lot of people. But yeah, I just went to a conference that's called Collaboration Cures. And there are a lot of different healthcare professionals there, all who are trying to come up with different ways to treat sleep apnea and airway problems. So there were a lot of dentists who specialize in, we talked a little bit about oral appliances. So there were a lot of dentists there talking about that. Myofunctional therapists who are also to do with tongue posture, and just really fascinating, like a lot of different people. And also Dr. Dana Johnson, who I know that you know, had been on my podcast because I'd seen a Facebook Live you did with her. And I was able to actually meet Dr. Johnson in person, which was so wonderful. and she gave a great presentation all about different communities of color and how racism can actually play a part in how quickly people are diagnosed with sleep apnea. One of her statistics is about how people of color are most likely to have sleep apnea, but least likely to be screened for it. So it was a really fascinating talk, and it was great to meet her in person. But to your question about having sleep apnea and going to the conference, I really have to manage my energy levels. Like I was saying, even though I treat my sleep apnea with a CPAP, I deal with like significant daytime sleepiness as well, which I've learned to manage over the years. But things like going to a conference where someone else might be like, great, I'm gonna go to every session and I'm gonna do all the stuff. For me, I had to really be specific and intentional about these are the most important things for me to go to. And I was absolutely exhausted. Like I was there for 3 days, and I probably was actually at the conference 4 hours each day for 3 days. And for me, that's a lot. And that's like being on and talking to people and all of that. So when I came home, plus it's worth saying that you're set up. So I talked a little bit about how positional therapy is important. So normally I sleep on my side and elevated, like with my head elevated. And of course I hadn't done any of that. So when I was in Atlanta, I just found it really difficult to sleep, and my AHI went up, and it was a lot just because it's a different, environment. So when I got home, I definitely crashed for a couple of days. I was pretty worthless. So I think sometimes it's worth saying these things, because on social media, you just see people smiling and I was at this thing, but it was a lot. So did that answer all the parts of your question?
Well, so there's like many layers. So the next thing I want to ask you is, I know you stepped away from the conference too, which I think is really great. And you went to the Atlanta Art Museum. I don't know what the official name is.
Atlanta Contemporary, it's called. It's a contemporary art gallery.
So I was just in Atlanta a few months ago, or in August, too. And I didn't know that there was this exhibit there. So tell us about the exhibit that you saw from the Nat Ministry, which is such a cool.
So so there's oh gosh, and now I'm not going to be able to remember her name, the Nat Ministry lady. So she has a wonderful Instagram page, and I saw that she was doing this installation at the I think it's the Atlanta Contemporary it's called. So it's basically a contemporary modern art gallery. It's really small, and it's lots of like really interesting small artists and community projects, and it's just a really great building generally. You would really like it. So next time you need to go. So I go in, and it's worth saying that I definitely grew up being taken to art galleries and that kind of thing, but I'm not really very up on modern art. And so when I first went in, I was like, I'm here for the Nat Ministry installation. And the lady was like, yeah, it's just around the corner right there. And I kind of knew a little bit about it. So I knew it was going to be like avant-garde and, different. And so I go in, it's basically an empty room with like a bench in the middle with the artist's lovely voice. And that's all you're looking at, is just like a bench with the thing. But then the artist is talking all about like, it's okay to rest, come on and lie down, and has a really wonderful soothing voice. And so I really loved it. It was really different. I just kind of, I kind of am always, maybe I'm a little bit like traditional in terms of art, so I'm just kind of like, what are we looking at here? But as an experience, like it was really great, and so I was really glad I took time to go and find that.
The other thing I was going to ask you about the conference is something that we talked a little bit about ourselves, you and I, which was, did you see a lot of representation of people living with sleep apnea at the conference besides yourself?
No. So I would say that a few of the, certainly a lot of the presenters were presenting case studies. But from a point of view of this airway went from these many millimeters to these many millimeters, or in terms of what treatment they did. There certainly were a couple of really wonderful presentations. There was one by a mother of a girl who had had a very compromised airway as a child, and her presentation was really touching and moving, and she talked all about the different therapies they tried, and it just really was, she was talking a lot about kids and what to watch for with kids. So that was wonderful. There was one of the presenters I found a little bit insensitive. He was, talking about kind of, like people with airways kind of similar. So it's worth saying I've been doing some palate expansion, which is a very controversial, not very well researched kind of area. But for some of us who have very narrow palates, the idea is that by expanding your palate, you can slightly improve your nasal breathing because it improves. Anyway, so he was kind of talking all about people's airways. And so just because I went through, all I was going to say was, just because I went through that intake process, they did a CT scan of my airway during that. And it was like, unsurprisingly, very small. And he was presenting this case with somebody with an airway double the size of mine. And he was basically just kind of not really talking about it as though it's a person. And he was kind of like, well, by the time you've got to this point, like, this is kind of a train wreck. And that just was really depressing to me, because he was kind of saying there's nothing to be done except like pretty extreme surgery, and which might be true, but I think that there's more sensitive ways to go about talking about that, which I think is why it's so important to have people share their firsthand experience of what living with these things is like. So
yeah, and for people with sleep apnea to be present, so that you should never lose sight of people. And when you think that you're only speaking to other doctors, then you might speak in a way,
there's almost an inside language, right?
And so I'm just so glad you were there, and for all that you're doing.
Well, thank you. I was going to say really quick, just because it's funny, I was in one of the other sessions with a dentist, and it was really excellent. He was talking a lot about some of the other people that need to be screened for sleep apnea, like things that can run together, all different health issues, that he was like, I think these people should definitely have sleep tests, and so should these people. So his presentation was great. And partway through, he was like, can I have a show of hands of how many dentists? And it was like half the room. And then he was like, what about hygienists? And it was like practically the other half of the room. And then it was like, a couple of physical therapists, or MDs or whatever. And then he was like, he was kind of looking at me because I'd been asking a lot of questions, and he said, do we have any others? And I was like, I'm a woman with sleep apnea with a podcast. And he was just like, yep, that's another. So, but he was really nice. We had a really good chat afterwards. But it's just funny, sometimes you're like the only person in the room,
Yeah, and it's just so important to be there. So thank you again for being there, and being a voice for people that are actually living with sleep apnea. I think that, we had one question here about why is it difficult? I've heard it's difficult for people to adhere to CPAP or other PAP therapies. What do you think makes it challenging?
Oh my gosh, it's so challenging for a lot of people. So a lot of the people that I've interviewed on my podcast have been people who just couldn't make the CPAP therapy work. And so it's a mixture of different things. So first of all, if you just imagine sleeping with something on your face. So anybody with claustrophobia or any sort of panic, though it can be really, really challenging. So certainly I interviewed one woman who was already living with anxiety and panic and claustrophobia. And for her, she had to do it for a certain amount of time to qualify for looking at other treatments. And she found it really horrendous. So that's one thing people definitely struggle with. Another thing is mask fit. So people's faces are just like there's as many different face shapes and sizes as you can imagine. And oftentimes I've heard some really horrendous stories, which is just because of COVID. People have just been like handed any size of shape of mask and just told to get on with it. And it makes such a huge difference having a mask that fits your face. So that's what I spent months and months like messing about with when I first had my CPAP, because I didn't know any different, right? I just pretty much got given, I actually got given a large man's face mask, which had like it's funny now because I know what to look for, but at the time I had these huge gaps where, you know, all the air was just leaking out and it was doing nothing, and it just felt terrible. So once I found a mask that worked, then that worked better for me. So there's all sorts of there's a lot of people who, I think it's worth saying that I came to this diagnosis after I was already married, and after my husband, you know, was absolutely on board for me doing whatever had to happen to get some sleep. But it's a really different thing if you're 19 or, you know, like, or you're single and you're contemplating dating with this whole thing. Yeah, there's definitely a lot, and it's worth saying that that's one of the big challenges, is trying to come up with alternatives to CPAP for people who just can't make it work. So
Sorry, I had a helicopter going over, so I muted myself. Always in LA.
so exciting.
Yeah. Oh, LA, so exciting.
Are they
Yeah.
gonna land on the helipad on the top of your building and take you somewhere?
Oh, that sounds fun. That sounds really fun. I don't know. You never know. Well, I think that that we have answered questions, and it's after 6. So why don't we go ahead and let you get on with your night and everybody else. So thank you again, Emma, for sharing your story tonight. Thank you for being the person willing to try this program for sleep apnea as the first person, not the last, but the first.
No, don't worry. I'm already working on everybody. We're going to have
You're
a lot of sleep
recruiting.
apnea people next year.
Yay.
Thank you so much. And to Lauren also.
Yes.
You guys are great and you've really helped me a lot.
Thank you. All right. Yes. Thank you, Lauren, our programs manager who manages the Rising Voices now, does an amazing job training our advocates. It's my baby of a program, and I never would have thought someone could raise my baby better than me or as well as me, but she has. So yeah, really grateful to Lauren, and thank you guys for tuning in. Please share the video, give us hearts and likes and all that good stuff. And we'll see you again in a few weeks. All right. Have a good night. Sleep well, Emma. Bye.